Welcome to our session. Do we need to hit the record button or something? Does anybody know?
It's already recording.
It is great. Welcome to our session. Please, as you go along, put questions you might have in the chat. The person that's not talking of either one of us will keep an eye on it, and we'll keep those questions in mind, try to address them either as we go or at the end, depending on what seems to fit. The session is Growing the Knowledge Tree, Core Concepts, Methods, Outcomes, and Tools. And I'm Dennis Beck. I'm Associate Professor of Educational Technology at the University of Arkansas. And my research agenda advocates for digital educational equity for vulnerable populations in immersive learning environments and in fully online schools, kind of the merged part of all of that. And Leonel, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Leonel Morgado. I'm an associate professor at Universidade Aberta. That's the Portuguese Open University. So I lecture entirely online. I'm also a senior researcher at ILKT, which is a very large independent research center. And I'm mostly from a computer sciences background, but I've been working with educational technology for the past 20 plus years, all the way from preschool, kindergarten to military training. So I'm here for the ride.
All right. Well, just a few things about the knowledge tree. As we were formulating it, there were a few, you might say, formational or foundational papers that we looked at. One by Chris Deedy back in 2009. He looked at the immersive interfaces for engagement and learning, really an editorial piece. But he kind of overall looked at different research studies and has shown that immersion in a digital environment could enhance education in three different ways. One was through multiple perspectives, allowing multiple perspectives. One was through situated learning, and one was through transfer. And he kind of made an industry-wide or an immersive learning field-wide call for more research back then, and we responded, right? Then in 2010, the much cited article by Dalgarno and Mark Lee, our iLRN colleague, on the learning affordances of 3D virtual environments. And that looked at the affordances of immersive learning environments, such as the facilitation of tasks that lead to enhanced spatial knowledge representation, greater opportunities for experiential learning, increased motivation and engagement, improved contextualization of learning, and richer, more effective collaborative learning as compared to tasks made possible by 2D alternatives. And then in 2016, Nilsson et al. In the journal Human Technology looked at immersion, and really this the definition of different definitions of immersion. And they approached it because in computer science, and in technical fields, there's been a long-standing definition of immersion as a system immersion based on Mel Slater's definition back in 2003, I think it was, or perhaps a little bit earlier. And they really took more of an interdisciplinary approach to defining immersion there. And they defined it as having, from the literature, 3 dimensions: the system dimension that Slater talks about, but also a narrative dimension and a challenge-based dimension. And then finishing then with the very first version of our knowledge tree, and which was really just a conceptual framework, creating a conceptual framework for mapping knowledge and tools in the field of immersive learning. Leonel, you want to kind of give us a brief overview of the knowledge tree?
Yes, thank you. So this stemmed for an effort to try and avoid immersive learning from going through the hardships that so many educational technologies have been before, of ignoring previous mistakes. So to give you an idea, when computers came about, the wrong question was, what's the impact of computers? And it took immense amount of labor in research to regard that's a bad question. It's not a matter of what computers do, is how you employ them pedagogically. The same problems came about with edutainment software, then the same problems with serious games, and we started seeing the same issues with immersive environments. And there, in all these circumstances, there's lots and lots of work, but that work is takes a long time to coalesce and to achieve significance because people use different terms, different concepts, so they cannot be compared. And several researchers authoring this proposal in 2021 came about to try and create this stronger, more developing way of bringing knowledge forward, reaching the practice, and learning from the practice, learning also from people in the fields. So the tree basically is a metaphor for bringing all these contributions together. So the roots of the tree is about establishing acknowledgeable definitions, a definition of immersion, definitions of learning, achieving common methods that people can reproduce and apply to their own purposes, scoping review methods, protocols, classification methods, research instruments, validated questionnaires, metrics, stuff that you can apply, and then it means you can question other people's results and you can implement them, replicate them, see how they go. This these roots are supposed to be grounding the knowledge into a field. And this green field here is where you start to create ontologies, taxonomies, data models, and the representations of your knowledge. So the tree grows, and it grows by accumulating evidence, by establishing communities like iLRN, where researchers and practitioners know each other in contact, by creating annual reports or regular reports, by creating regular reviews of the field, updated reviews of the field. It branches out then. It branches out in different fields of inquiry, like educational technology, biomedical, knowledge management, library science, and other fields, but also on the political side, by establishing research priorities, research agendas. The tree branching out like that then has leaves, and these leaves are the practitioner accounts, the exemplary cases, the instrument you use, the templates that you can use, in all sorts of tools, by tools not just software, but also how-to guides, resource wikis, and we hope birds populate the tree. People from all sorts of interests connecting into this knowledge tree by tagging, by reporting, bringing new experiences. And we hope this way that the tree breathes from this environment with all this novelty, but grows by grounding itself in sound science. This is our ambition. This is what we are trying to accomplish. Next slide, Dennis, please. So we do have some results, and this presentation is about what we have achieved so far. So, for instance, regarding on the roots, regarding definitions, we have adopted Nielsen's definition, which was grounded in an extensive and very rigorous and thought out literature review, and we built upon it. So we use the definition of immersion that then is mentioned, based on the systems that make you present, that make you feel present, based on the narrative that gives context and meaning, and based on agency, the agency that the ability for you to intervene, to address challenges, to address engagement. This definition has been presented already in these two papers, alongside with definitions for immersive learning and environments. And the importance of immersive learning as a definition is mostly to remind people that learning can mean many things, and here as a community, as a field of inquiry, we embrace them all. So it's the learning in the individual, but it's also the learning of an organization. It's the learning in the organizational aspect, how you prepare the learning environment, how you manage it. But it's also the learning at the community level. It's the learning from the perspective of how you address learning policies from the cognitive level, and even epistemological discussions on what constitutes learning if you have an immersive environment where people engaging with you may actually be artificial intelligences. So defining learning in this wider scope is important, and it was done. And the immersive environments, they were also defined, and the most important aspect is that they are not special environments. Immersive environments is a way in which you look at the places where learning occurs with immersion. So any environment can be interpreted as being an immersive environment. It's your theoretical lens. We also provided a framework to analyze what happens in terms of 3 tiers of educational approach. So we defined what is an educational strategy, what is an educational practice, and what is an educational use of technology or educational action. So this approach that has been now published and sustained enables us to try and tackle the big problem of reproducibility, of trying to navigate, and we'll talk about that more later. We also presented one definition of what would be the conference communities of iLRN, saying if you want to survey the community, these are the people that constitute it, and this is how you update those. So we define the community, for instance, as the board members, the presenters, the authors, the keynote speakers, the program committee members, etc. We clarify that you can look at all these names for all these events. We list the events. And so that means that if you want to survey this community for priorities, for opinions, you have a way to ensure that you're trying to survey the same universe of respondents. This is some examples. Now over to you, Dennis, for the next slide.
Sorry, I was muted. Apologize. So
I was wondering.
So some of the work we did have done so far focused on creating methods for the knowledge tree. And really one of those was mapping the uses of immersive learning environments to the 3 dimensions of immersion that we mentioned from Nielsen, that, the system, the narrative, the challenge, which we renamed in our paper agency, I think is what we did. And that could be found in the Beck, Morgado, and O'Shea in the 2020 paper in the Journal of Universal Computer Science. Really, and you can see a little image there on that, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail later. Secondly, the mapping the practices to strategies by using specific criteria, specifically theoretical affinity. And then thirdly, a flexible assessment framework for exploratory immersive environments that Madeira and Goodall looked at. So first of all, looking at this a little bit more up close here, you can see this 3-dimensional mapping that we did here. And really the purpose of that was so that both researchers and practitioners could interpret an immersive learning environment under these 3 dimensions. How does it immerse? By using the system. How does it immerse? By using narrative. How does it immerse? By using agency. And this enables both researchers and practitioners to reflect and act upon these aspects of an immersive learning environment. For example, a teacher might consider whether helping students understand the career of an astronaut requires a switch in perspective. In other words, like seeing how the Earth is big, gets bigger as somebody ascends into space. Or are they more focused on a cultural or emotional experience, like the feeling of fragility of our minuscule world in the universe? So, and this is important because according to our research, perspective switching depends more on system immersion and narrative immersion, whereas cultural and emotional experiences depend more on narrative immersion and to a smaller degree, agency. So this reflection helps can help the teacher plan accordingly by considering the kind of immersive learning environment needed. Another example, a teacher might consider that there's little time or budget for drafting narratives and creating visual meaning, and thus determine that the immersive environments that are focused on system and agency are perhaps more readily implementable for the current situation, like for interactive manipulation, for exploration, for data collection, engagement. Another example, consider that a researcher wants to document the immersion elements of an environment. This would recommend that aspects from these 3 dimensions were recorded. So like the presence provided by the system, the meaning and context provided by the narrative. In other words, like the story, the visual meaning, the meaning of sequences of events, emotional aspects, things like that. And then also like the engagement, the flow, the focus provided by agency, available interactions, tasks, activities, goals, those sorts of things. So that's a look at this first, the mapping of the uses to the 3 dimensions of immersion. Moving along, this next method was really that we focused on mapping the practices to strategies by using specific criteria. And we call it the immersive learning brain. It's just an analogy because we were looking at it, and it's looking at this map that we came up with, that we used, this theoretical affinity map. And I think it was me, it might have been Leonel and I together, both kind of remarked, that kind of looks like a brain. And we kind of messed with it and tried to see if we could overlay a brain on it, and we did. So it's only a metaphor to use in a way of remembering it, not necessarily relevant to specific parts of the brain. So in this, like I said, we used theoretical affinity. We linked the practice of authentic practice and assessment. This is an example with the strategies of after action review and authentic learning. We also linked the strategy of formative assessment to the practice of providing automated feedback and tutoring. And then we linked the strategy of authentic learning to the practices of students designing and developing immersive products and experiences. And you should note here that we can use other criteria rather than just theoretical affinity. We can use co-occurrence of practices and strategies on the same papers, and we can use co-citations of other papers by the source papers for the strategies and practices. And looking at things like, are there common authors? Are there common institutions, publication outlets, as a way of looking at these affinities? So yeah, those 2 I really wanted to focus on. And then Leonel, you want to take this next one?
Okay. Whoops. There was a jump there, I think.
No, this is the slide we're on now.
No, you jumped the outcome slide.
Oh.
There you go. There we are. So this is all so far were about definitions that you can use, concepts and methods. We have been applying all of that. So one of the first results was the actual identification of current uses from the literature of immersive learning environments. That has enabled us to do what Dennis just did, which is we know now that there are specific uses like perspective switching, emotional experiences, skill training, engagement. We know those are actual uses situated on the immersion cube. And so we could also map the gaps. And that small image there on the left shows you that there are areas without any reported uses, areas on the concepts of immersion. Now, that could be the case of new approaches needed, but it may also be the case, and it is indeed the case for several of them, that people are not looking at what they are doing as if it was immersive. So for instance, one of those areas at the bottom, the one on the bottom, is is the kinds of immersive environments where you don't need lots of technology, very little or no technology, but you need lots of narrative and lots of challenge, lots of agency. Well, we do have educational environments like that. Role play, board games. So that those activities are immersive with low technology. They are not being labeled as such. And that means that's a field of inquiry to combine into this community. So with that result out there in terms of the uses and the gaps, you are welcome to check it. Another result was establishing research priorities for immersive technology. Using the definition of the community, we surveyed it. And so a team including Horacio Gaspar, including Christian Gottel, and several others went about collecting those kinds of priorities, organizing them, ranking by opinion, and it's a long list. But you can find it in that repository. It was published in Virtual Reality Journal, and actually gives you a rough idea that there are significant differences in what the community says is more relevant to solve right away, or in more like a wishful thing. More recently, just this year, in fact, two more results. As Dennis said, the immersive learning brain, besides the method which we presented and mentioned as a method, we applied it. And so we actually have the current output in terms of educational strategies, educational practices coming from the literature, and the resulting map. You can do much better here with this than just reading a long list of practices and strategies. You can navigate them by affinity. So you can say, I'm interested in people using the multimedia learning theory. Okay, that's the blue cluster area. Check out those practices and strategies. I'm interested in collaboration. That's the purple cluster, and so forth. So this is a very, very recent outcome that you are welcome to follow. And also recently, actually, it's going to be presented to next month in the physical iLRN, so you can find it in the proceedings. Andreas Dengel and Minjuan Wang and several others have combed and went over the thematic content analysis of previous workshops in iLRN 2022 to establish a research agenda for immersive learning for the next 7 years. So that's the research agenda 2030. And this is also an outcome from all these processes. Over to you, Dennis, for the next slide.
Okay. We also mentioned some tools and instruments. And this slide, I think we're going to actually work together on a little bit and team partner on this one a little bit. One is the actual tool, the research priorities questionnaire that Leonel mentioned, and can be used again to by others in the iLRN community to look at research priorities in their specific area of immersive learning research. Another thing is the knowledge tree structure questionnaire. Leonel and I are presenting at the in-person iLRN conference this year on the validation, along with Christian Gudel, the validation of the structure of the knowledge tree by immersive learning researchers worldwide. And this is really important because we came up with this great so-called great idea that we think is great, but we didn't know if it would resonate with researchers worldwide. So we sent it out to a lot of different researchers, and we were surprised by how, by just really the resounding response. And it's not just that kind of vanilla, that uniform. And in that, but in that session, that in-person session, we'll go into more detail on that. Also, the scoping review protocol that we created for doing our, what's that?
Sorry about that. So I was a bit garbled. So we already talked about the research priorities questionnaire, but I'd like to mention that the questionnaire itself was validated and published published. So you don't have to wait for us to run and publish results. You are free to use it as an instrument. It is a validated instrument. Similarly, with the knowledge tree questionnaire, it was validated and published. So you can find it, download it, and simply run it.
Yeah, and if you need a copy of it, you can just email us. And if you're not able to access it for some reason or another, we'd be happy to send it to you. And it's going to be also part of the iLRN knowledge base. You'll be able to access it as a member of iLRN. But I also mentioned the scoping reviews protocol, which shows it's a systematic tool that shows researchers how to perform a similar scoping review in their specific area of immersive learning. And that's really important because using that, other researchers using that will allow more generalization and comparisons between different reviews. Leonel, you want to talk a little bit about the recommendation tool and visualization tools?
Yes, thank you. So as I was mentioning earlier, the visualization tool stopped working and the recommendation tool website is down. But here is doing it a bit like in the old time kitchen situation. Here's something I cooked up earlier. So this should update at any moment. You are presenting. Can you stop the presentation and restart it? I just pasted it there. There you go. So this I just posted. I just posted this on the Discord of iLRN earlier. So, but actually I can put it on this higher resolution. Just a second. This is a presentation. So what we did was we basically went after every single paper associated with one of our practices, strategies, or uses. And that's all those small white dots. That each white dot is an actual paper. So every colored ball here or cube is in this visualization is an educational strategy or practice. So this is the diagram you were seeing there as a brain. It doesn't look like a brain in 3D. So this is the 3D visualization, but we did a bit further than that. As you can see on the left, you can filter. We can actually just select a few strategies and practices, or select by paper, select by author, institutions, by publication outlets. So you can just check what's going on in some conferences and journals, and you can decide on different clustering criterion. So I'll share the site because I can open the menus that way. So here we go. It's this one.
So Leonel, obviously this kind of tool will be really helpful if you're doing doing a research study involving, I don't know, mixed reality environments and authentic assessment, to look up the authentic assessment strategies or practices, and based on that, look at those papers and be able to cite those papers, and then also to be able to look at the journals those papers come from and see which journals potentially might be more favorable to receive your study and to be so your study can be published.
Oh, yes, definitely. And also, as a practitioner, if you say, I need examples, I need something to guide me, you can say, okay, I like, for instance, let's say, authentic learning, as you said. Who's working on that in these fields? Which areas of practice? Which kinds of strategies? Okay, what other papers use the same strategy, use the same practice? And you can navigate it that way. But also as a researcher, you can try to speed some kind of early review saying, let me focus on what kind of clusters are here. So because, for instance, we have a theoretical affinity saying, okay, this kind of theory and this kind of practice are very connected, so they are closer. But you can have other criteria. For instance, you can have a paper citation criterion, which is I can group strategies and practices because they are being mentioned on the same papers. And that means that I can find on those papers examples that have those combinations. Or I may want to see who is being cited by similar papers, meaning which strategies and practices are being inspired by specific papers. All of this enables us to navigate the knowledge and the literature on the field. And so I just hope that this restarts working eventually, because it's not working now. I can also, let's just see if the immersivetraining.eu website is up again, but it wasn't. So I can show you the tool in a paper, but it was on this website.
So while Leonel is looking into there, the link to the tool, and we'll bring up that slide again in a minute that has those URLs in it, and you can take screenshots of it. What the recommendation tool does is it allows users to enter their resources, their goals, their constraints, like level of knowledge or skills, their equipment available, ability to recreate visuals and narratives, things like that, as well as their preferred pedagogical approach. And then the system provides recommendations on how to employ immersive environments for their situation. And like we said, we apologize. It's normally both of these tools have been up. It's a little frustrating that neither is up today. A little bit egg in our eyes.
Yeah, but I can give, at least we published the images. So what the tool does, for instance, is this: you have a questionnaire, and the questionnaire is about very practical stuff, like this. So this is the kind of example of the questionnaire. How much time do you have available to plan and create? Do you want to plan an activity just to raise awareness or to learn in depth? And for the learners, short or long? So these kind of very resource and goal-based questions. We ask you, do you have time and experience to create narratives? Do you have yourself or colleagues or budget to create nice visuals? What kind of equipment? What kind of experiences with equipment? So these very hands-on, effective questions about what's your situation. And even the examples we give is just to make sure that you're not giving a rough idea of 1 to 5. We tell you, when you say how much time available, it's like, okay, guys, minimum example is like you have 1 week to prepare, or you have 1 semester margin to prepare. So what we did was we mapped those circumstances to system immersion, narrative immersion, and challenge immersion, and that enables us to measure a distance between your situation and each use of immersive environments. Then what we did was, for each of those uses, we provide a suggestion of how to employ it for different preferences of pedagogical methodology. So for instance, if you want to change human behavior using an expository methodology, that means you explain. But if you want to change human behavior using immersive environments on a demonstrative pedagogy, you will use evidences and emphasis and so forth. So we've done all of this. The questionnaire looks like this on that website that is now down, just a common questionnaire. And then, of course, it gives you results like this. You use an immersive environment to seeing the invisible changing human behavior, augmented context with demonstrative methodology. And then we tell you how, involve, evidence, highlight. And then we link this to video examples. So examples, web video examples found available on the web, which we have now tagged according to be examples of this. So this is the tool you will have available again as soon as I make it run and up again on immersivetraining.eu.
And this is that slide that I promised that has those URLs for the different tools and instruments that are there. So please take your screenshots so you can get them.
Actually, we can publish this on SlideShare right away, so you can.
That's also probably a great idea. If maybe you would do that, Leonel. So just to wrap this presentation up, and then we'll take questions. some future directions that we're doing for the knowledge tree. We're soliciting the iLRN houses and other initiatives to curate the knowledge tree. That will involve work for updating, tagging, running custom mapping criteria surveys, those sorts of things. We're going to use the discussion boards on the new iLRN's website to drive additions of content to the knowledge tree. Also, my colleague and I, Scott Warren, for those of you who know him at North Texas, have developed a framework called the Ethical Choices in Educational Technology Framework. And we're developing a special version of that Ethical Choices in Immersive Technologies Framework, as well as a suite of tools, including an AI chatbot. And so that's another direction we're heading. We're updating the visualization tools that we've been over the last 5 or 10 minutes, as Leonel has been talking about them, to view and interact with the educational strategies and practices and uses map of the literature, and that will be housed on the iLRN website. And then in general, the plan is to bring generative AI into the epistemological process. Leonel, did you have anything to add to that, or should we just open it up for questions?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to emphasize in the open for questions that the tree is not anyone's. So the tree is something for you to build, for you to grow and develop. So really, consider, I'll give an example. Consider that those criteria of mapping educational strategies to practices. An house of application or a chapter may decide we have different relevance criteria for this mapping. Cool. Apply it. Bring new tags, because this is the point of the knowledge tree. Is not to create a frozen piece of knowledge. No, it's about having common methods, common language, common tools and instruments, so everyone can build, share, update, and replace. That's how science grows. That's it for me.
All right. So, and Genevieve, if you could just go ahead and email me that it's just come out in publication in like March or April, and a book chapter, the Ethical Choices in Educational Technology Framework. And I want to emphasize, we've not created the special version of it for immersive technologies, the more specific one, or the suite of tools yet, but that's a future direction that we're heading in. We're also developing a version of the framework for developers. Could you show the slide for flexible assessment? Yes, I can try to do that.
I'm already uploading to SlideShare meanwhile.
Let's see, is it? Okay, here we go. So yes, this is work by, we're missing a slide. I'm not sure where it went, but we had a slide explaining the flexible assessment framework for exploratory immersive environments by Madeira and Goodall, which had this image here in it. I apologize for that. But this particular bit.ly link will take you to it, that paper.
So there's a question, what other stakeholders are missing? Okay, from which slide? Genevieve?
Oh no, I meant generally from input into the knowledge tree. Dennis just quickly mentioned, like, you're doing the ethical choices framework, and then you're doing a separate one for developers. So which other stakeholders in general need to be brought into the knowledge tree? Because that's a big challenge.
Oh, that's a great question. So I'd say lots and lots of people from different, I mean, not just researchers and practitioners and developers. Developers, when I say developers, I use it in a broad sense, not just technology developers, but also instructional developers, maybe more well known as instructional designers, and others like that. But you can imagine there being so many different higher education administrators, as well as primary and secondary school administrators, would be another really interesting input to the knowledge tree and these different tools that we've developed. Really, the reality is the more diverse we get in terms of the stakeholders that we bring in, the more deep we can go with our roots, because we'll start to see which frameworks and which methods and which of those things will actually apply cross discipline and or across different roles, and which won't, which will need to be kind of not necessarily thrown out, but let's say transformed for that specific role.
There are many stakeholders and conflicting priorities among stakeholders sometimes. So it's really important that we develop common language and common references. Let me give you an example. While we were developing the recommendation tool, we were being very strict, saying we do not recommend pedagogy. We make a recommendation of the situation and how, for your pedagogical preferences, that will lead to specific pedagogical approaches and actions, but you're the decision maker from the pedagogical aspect. This is all well and sound, but one of the feedback we were getting from funders was, very well, but why don't you recommend specific technology? Because we have manufacturers who want you to recommend technology. He said, I can't do that. I cannot recommend specific brands because that's different. And then it got even further scaled, which was, this is being funded by the European Union, Leonel, by the European Commission. So this is supposed to enable highlighting European technology and manufacturers. As a, okay. One thing is science, the other is policy. And I kept saying, look, what we can do is we can have a showcase of available technology. I don't mind if manufacturers tag, and we can, and someone validates that, tag which kind of approaches their technology can be used for. I don't mind that they share their own exemplars and videos of people using their stuff. But that will never easily match a scientific recommendation of an educational approach. So you see, right here, you have researchers trying to provide knowledge about recommendations and building for recommendation for practice. You have practitioners with specific interests, but then you have manufacturers with other interests, and you have public policy makers with yet another set of interests. So it's very, very important that people have at least access to common definitions and referentials, because they are going to clash in perspective. And the only way for us to build some sort of understanding is trying to have this discussion ongoing.
Exactly. What about other questions that you might have about the knowledge tree, about how you can be involved, perhaps about some of these contributions? One of the things that, as you're sitting here, you might be thinking, hey, how come they didn't present my work? My work fits in here. And I would say, yes, it does. We're probably just a little bit overwhelmed, I would say. Leonel and I have been pretty overwhelmed with getting things started and trying to do the foundation for it. So email us with that information, or get it to us in some way or the other. Really, how can you be involved? On the new iLRN website, there are houses, and in the houses, there are discussion boards. In those discussion boards, post your work and say, I think this needs to go in the knowledge tree in a particular section. I think it's a root, I think it's a method, or I think it's a systematic lit review. So I think it goes in the trunk. And then that information will be sent and curated by others within iLRN. Oh yes, and Leonel, thank you for showing me that. You see that contribute to the knowledge tree. There, is that a link?
No, it is not a link, but because we have had an open, what you mentioned was very important. We had an open call for contributions. We had one contribution because people mostly want to show their results. And this is really our push, is that beyond focusing on results, focus on methods and instruments and definitions, combine them, show them, propose people use them. So the solution we came up with right now is that you go right where Dennis told you, you go to chapters and houses and build a discussion and then feed back to the knowledge tree, because we can make this grow from this simple website and page. Okay, we can start to have a discussion on Discord. We can start to have a repository. We can turn this, and we hope to turn this into a resource site. It could be a wiki, as simple as that, but it can be a place where you can find each of these elements, and you can link those to your papers, to your videos, to your exemplars, so you can have a way of trying to then discuss this on next conferences of iLRN and trying to say, here are the definitions that we follow. Some of them may even be conflicting. That's okay, but these are definitions we are using, because we have like 9 minutes. Let me show Dennis one of our source papers. One of our first papers in this presentation was the unifying, was this thing here. Oh, I'm showing our text here. So this Morgado and Beck thing here, we did something there to showcase the need for this. I'm still sharing the screen, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. So one of the things we did in this paper, with this is also our scoping review protocol, but one of the things we did was we went and checked which definitions of immersion are people using. And so we went, there you go. So we went and see what definitions of immersion are people using. And we checked 37 papers. And here are the results. Let me zoom out a bit and go straight to results. So this is a bit shocking, but this is the states of our area of research. So of all those papers, so 7 papers of 35, 7 papers considered it was just technological fidelity. So if it is good technology, it was immersion. 4 were unspecific. Oh, sorry, 12, because of the 35, then most of them didn't even define immersion. So unspecific immersion with some definition, but did not clarify. 2 were about engagement. 1 was about interaction. 1 is about narrative. This is terrible, because this is not comparable. People are talking about different kinds of immersion. And what definitions? Well, for technological fidelity, we had 3 main definitions: Slater, also Wilbur, and Azuma. People that were not specific had 0 influential papers. They just brought immersion out of thin air. For engagement, 2 papers, 2 definitions: Csikszentmihalyi and Cole. So this is absolutely terrible. In the situation is absolutely terrible, because in 35 papers, you don't have anything on most of them, and then you end up with 12, and on 12 you've got like 5 different approaches to immersion with all these different 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different references. There is no easy discussion or comparison in this situation. So this is why we've created a knowledge tree. It's okay if you want to focus on immersive narratives. It's okay if you want to engage yourself in immersive agency. It's okay if you are aware that you are focusing on a perspective, and that brings forth a way to dialogue. It's terrible when you think you are discussing the same thing and the only thing you have in common is the letters that come up in the word immersion.
Can I chime in real quick? So
Yep.
First of all, Leonel and Dennis, I just want to just applaud your efforts. I've been watching y'all work on this for the past few years, and I'm just amazed at the progress y'all have done, and just this is a fantastic and needed thing. So 2 things about immersion. One is I just put in the chat a study that was published a couple months ago that did a Delphi approach to that term, and
cool.
I have a big, yeah, it's an interesting study because one of the things that I think is a serious issue is how we define immersion and the term immersive and this whole IVR thing that people have sort of just put in thinking, oh, if it's immersive VR, I call it IVR, it means headset, where we've seen through the work of a lot of folks in this group and in iLRN and research is that, you know, a desktop VR type of a learning game, if you're putting on headsets, we have data that shows these are immersive experiences too. Maybe not as immersive as a headset, but a desktop VR experience is immersive. And yet it seems like the journals or the field or whoever has sort of like latched on to this IVR term where it really, to me, doesn't make sense. They should be calling it just headset VR instead of IVR. So I just thought I'd just comment on that.
No, thanks, Alec. I appreciate you sharing that article and commenting on it. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the word immersion has become like a piece of favorite candy to a child. It's like they don't really know what it is. They just know they like it and they like to eat a lot of it, right? And so it's used ubiquitously to the point where it doesn't even have meaning. And so I think Leonel was pointing to that when he said there were so many papers that didn't even define it. They just used it because they thought it was so ubiquitous. Let's believe the best, at least. You know, they thought it was so ubiquitous. So great comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just close with actually from that Delphi approach study. I actually, at the end of the day, how they ended up defining it based on their study results, I actually agree with them. I thought that was a pretty nice definition with it because it's pretty expansive and
I just dig into it. I just dig into it right now. Dennis, I just noted this on our notes on the last slide, just there, that Alec Bodden contributed with this paper, and I opened it and skimmed it to check exactly what you said. What definition of immersion they used? It's a 2021. It's very similar to Nielsen's. They basically have the 3 dimensions, but they have an extra one. So basically, they called empathic and emotionally as an extra dimension, and make one called spatial. Actually, I want to dig into that because Nielsen has a very strong argument on why empathic immersion is encompassed in the other 3. So I want to see these counter arguments because this paper is 4 years later, but this is exactly the kind of discussion we need. Once we are discussing the grounding of what we're talking about, we can progress. When people simply ignore and just take it out of inspiration, we can progress much slower because we are comparing different things. We are discussing different things. So
yeah, and I'm sorry, but the session is going to end in.
Kudos to you.
the session is going to end in less than a minute. Thank you so much. You guys are an amazing audience. We've really enjoyed all the interactions. Hope you have an amazing rest of the conference, and please come to San Luis Obispo. We will be there in person, and we're looking forward to meeting all of you.